I'm very proud of standing here and do this presentation. It was a presentation that I also gave in Copenhagen, where Yannick Gardin of the same poultry veterinary study group, he's a member of it, heard it and asked me to do it also in this symposium. Many thanks also to the University of Utrecht and the Central Veterinary Institute, because I'm using their information. I'm just the messenger of what we experienced in Holland in the outbreaks in November 2014. This was the first slide of my presentation then, with pictures of the things that happened. First of all, I have to tell something about the Netherlands. The Netherlands are so called because the Netherlands means we are a low country, and a big part of our country is below sea level. Sorry. As you can see here, it's almost 26% of the land surface below the sea level, which means that we are having a very wet land, which is attractive for waterfall. And Holland is well known for all these structures to block the seawater to come into the land. Holland is not only a very people-dense country, it's also a very poultry-dense country, with in some places a very big poultry density per square kilometer. You have sometimes 3-4 poultry farms, and it also means, and that was an experience in the outbreak of 2003, that it easily can spread from one farm to another if something happens. Then about the outbreak of H5N8 in November 2014, and here the other subjects that I will speak about. It started in the place Hekendorp. We were all shocked. On a Sunday, we heard the news that on a multi-age layer farm, H5N8 of the high-path avian flu type was found. And then the Dutch Ministry of Economical Affairs, they declared 3 days of standstill. So no transport of all, no visitors can visit farms, as we call it, the total standstill. The first farm was a multi-age layer farm. You see here big houses, also 2 level houses, and also multi-age, in which only one of the houses with layers was positive. And you have to look well, but behind the farm there was also a canal. By the way, we were very lucky because this first farm was in a less poultry-dense area. Within 1 kilometer there were only 2 farms which were negative, and within the 10-kilometer zone there were only, 3-kilometer zone there were 10 farms, of which 5 farms were empty. And that's a luck when you start with this. You've seen the map of Holland, and you've seen that we have that poultry-dense areas in the center of the country and in the south, and that there is a concentration in the eastern part. And the luck was that the first one, Hekendorp, was in that less poultry-dense area in the western part of the country, the wetlands of our country. The second one, a few days later, was also shocking, also layers. And then the third one and the fourth one in Kamperveen were very near to each other. You can argue about which one was the first. We have the feeling, and it seems logical, that it were the ducks, because ducks don't show severe symptoms. It's hard to understand, hard to see that avian flu is happening in ducks. And possibly the broiler breeders that were seen first with problems were infected from the neighborhood of the ducks. And then there was a 5th case at the west part, very near the Hague in Zoeterwoude, also layers. And all these farms kept their poultry inside. Okay, one of them had a period where they were outside, but they were already brought in before the outbreaks started. A summary of what happened in November 2014, 5 outbreaks with more than 300,000 culled birds, no human cases, luckily, and a total cost of up to 56 million in euros. We have had a very bad experience in 2003 with H7N7. It was a total different type with total different symptoms. It started very slow with decrease of feed intake and water intake, and it costed us some days more to find out, and I will explain this later on. And this was a big disaster. We had learned a lot of hard lessons. In 2003, there was even a fatal case. One veterinarian died. The veterinarian visited one of the farms that were positive. 30 million of birds killed, 255 outbreaks, and it costed 500 million. It was a disaster. It was since then that in Holland an early warning system was started and also a good surveillance program, especially to look for low-path avian flu. Because that was the case in 2003, it was more than 70 years before that there was a last outbreak. Nobody remembered this, and especially for me too, never seen it before, so you're recognizing new things which cannot be distinguished as this must be avian flu in your differential diagnosis. You must put it in your list, but there are so many things to think about, and we never thought, my colleagues and I, about avian flu. It was a hard lesson. It costed nearly a week. Then the clinical signs of the outbreak in 2014. It's a little bit a difficult table, but if you look vertically, you see the several farms. The Hekendom farm, the first one, the Ter A farm. The second one, the 2 Kamperveen farms, the broiler breeders and the ducks. And realize yourself that the ducks were multi-age. He had younger and older birds. And if you look here, when the mortality started, he sent, and you will see here the explanation of the abbreviations, he sent the older ducks to the slaughterhouse. And we really went to the eye of the needle because the slaughterhouse was exactly in the most poultry-dense area, the Gelderse Valley in Ermelo, one of the places well known there. And the truck that brought these ducks to the slaughterhouse went then to Barneveld. And Barneveld is our chicken city. Some of you may have heard of it. If it had been brought to Barneveld, it would have been a disaster because of the poultry density there. The government decided to slaughter the contact flock in Barneveld, and nothing happened, and this flock was proved to be negative, luckily. Very typical is, and that is the big difference with 2003, that it started already very soon with higher mortality. So it was more easily recognized as avian flu. Veterinarians did their work better. They earlier sent material to CVI. We have the possibility of taking swabs, sending him in to exclude avian flu. It's one of the lessons that we have learned from 2003 outbreak. And also they earlier notified to the government that something was happened which could be avian flu. A specialist team is then sent to the farm, swabs and blood samples are taken, and within 24 hours, it's the good work of CVI, Central Veterinary Institute of Lelystad, we are sure whether it is avian flu or not. The big difference with 2003, that the reaction was adequate in all 5 cases. The clinical signs further. Depressed birds. I will show you a film of it. The drop in egg production in layers was not so fast, not in the first stadium. Hardly any egg abnormalities, sporadic cyanosis, conjunctivitis and nervous symptoms, and the postmortems, a little bit like the H7N7 in 2003, a mild peritonitis and assaculitis, also in ducks, but the symptoms in ducks were very mild. So it could have been missed in the early stage in the ducks. And then you can imagine what happens if forced ventilation spreads with the air that you are ventilating to the neighborhood, the virus. It's often said from the outbreak in 2003. And what happened, the broiler breeder farm, because he expected his birds to be delivered to the slaughterhouse, he took out the feeding system and other material, put it outside the house, and possibly this is the explanation that an infection was brought in these broiler breeder houses. I'll show you a film from this broiler breeder house. Hopefully it can be started now. The colleague that went in here was Paul Cornelis, and he told me it looked like two types of birds in these broiler breeders. They are very bold because they are old, more than 60 weeks old, and it looked like two types of birds, the sick ones and the healthy ones. And it also meant that there was a very sudden onset of disease. You can look it up later on. Then the measures taken by the Ministry of Economic Affairs. The goal was to keep away the virus from the poultry dense areas, Gelderse Vallei, Gelders Valley, and the southeast, where I'm practicing also with a very big poultry density. And what they did, they decided to make zones, sections, where there was it was forbidden to transport poultry or to drive from one division to another. Also, and that's the typical EU approach, around the infected farms there were zones, like protection zones in the middle and surveillance zones around it. And sometimes you need corridors to bring, for instance, broilers to the slaughterhouse, and otherwise when you have to bring manure from one division to the other. And after a few outbreaks, the government feared, the ministry feared, that in the poultry dense areas we would have still that high poultry density, and then a decision was made, and afterwards we easily can say, why did they do it? But at that moment they had to decide. They decided that no new chicks could be sent, could be delivered to the farms. So we killed in Holland a lot of young chicks, millions and millions, broilers, rearing birds. It was a disaster. But the choice was to do so because we have already had some experience with setting up new birds in 2003 and kill them when they are 5 or 6 weeks or older, even then. It was a decision, and afterwards you can say, why did they do so? But at that moment someone had to decide. But it was a disaster. Then the question, did the virus spread from farm to farm? Was there a direct link between farms? And research was going on from the faculty and the CVI. Farm information was gathered, and at the end the conclusion was there was no direct contact. You can hardly believe that between broiler breeder farms and layer farms there are contacts. There weren't at all. No direct contacts between the farms. In the same period, people find out in the surveillance of wild birds that in some widgeons, I didn't know what widgeons are, but the Latin name is Anas penelope, that there were 2 samples, positive fecal samples, positive on H5N8, and it's likely that wild birds migratory waterfowl brought this to Holland. I will tell later about it. This was also presented yesterday by Ruud Boustra of the Central Veterinary Institute. She also will present about this, about the testing tomorrow as stand-in for someone else. That most likely the campavein isolates were the same, and that it looks like in that period there were several introductions of virus, different, Zoeterwoude ter Aar, Hekendorp and the two in Campaveen, but also that there was a common source possible because we found it from Widgeons and also the England and German strain. It's work from others and for sure they can tell you more about it. So in the tracing they found out that the first Hekendorp ter Aar and Campaveen and Zoeterwoude looked like separate introductions, that the Campaveen types are very similar. Campaveen is a special one because there was also a farm between the two infected farms. Between the broiler breeder farm and the duck farms, there was also a broiler breeder farm, and very special, with a winter garden where the chicks, the broilers cannot go outside. This farm was not infected. The ducks were infected, and there the broiler breeder farm was infected, and this farm between was not infected. Very special. Talking about risk factors, I told you about the wet country, Holland. We have a lot of rainy days, and also in those days, in the November period. And you can imagine that when you get water on the roof and you get it on the ground, that possibly from waterfall droppings, virus can be brought on the courtyard. And if you then let dogs or cats go inside your houses, you possibly can explain as a risk factor that it can be introduced. The other pictures show the wet country with a lot of waterfall, and especially after rainy days that you have wet places. And as we see in Holland, on a lot of places, water between farms, water inside farms, and very special also that you sometimes see that feces is dripping from these covers because wild birds sit on it, and behind these covers are the air inlets. Also discussion is going on whether we do right in the prevention of rodents. In all these places a lot of mice and rats are seen. And then the introduction to the Netherlands. We were not the only country having this H5N8. Also it was found 1 week or 2 weeks before in Germany, in the same period in United Kingdom, and also in that period in Italy. And then a most likely explanation that in that period, it's already discussed these days, and also in the presentation of Ruud yesterday, Ruud Boustra, it is most likely that if you look at the migratory flyways, that the virus is brought towards places where there is a mixing zone of the certain flyways. And the flyway towards the western part of Europe, over Holland, could possibly be the source of the H5N8 brought to Holland. And possibly in the same way, the other direction, from there to the north of America. And then, very special in Holland, the public likes to see chickens go outside, not only free-range layers, but also broilers, organic broilers, are kept outside more and more. So we are getting more risk of getting low path or high path AI. This is in that period, 2014, 2015, the situation in Holland, with also a lot of low paths, and a very special one, H5N2 in Milhezen in our practice. The situation in Holland in the first months of this year, in Europe, with outbreaks of HPAI, these are all HPAIs in Germany, in Turkey, Bulgaria, Romania, and the United Kingdom. And if I put it all, with the thanks of many people who helped me with this, you see that in the total of Europe, you see continuously findings of low path and high path. Not only in the Netherlands, but also in other countries. Take-home messages, as I told you, we've learned from 2003. You need a good monitoring system, especially when you have free-range birds. An early warning, you can discuss about when you have to warn. We have some limited factors like decreased food and water consumption and mortality. We've learned from it. Possibly we should change to a lower profile. It's also put in the presentation of CVI, which is exposed in the exhibition. Be prepared and well equipped when there is an outbreak. And not the last and the least important thing, typical for Holland, it's this. We have an inconsistency in the public opinion. People want to send poultry outside, but in the meantime they don't realize that we have a bigger risk of getting avian flu. And when in the media people see these pictures, the culling of the birds, every time again the discussion starts about vaccination. Is this an alternative for culling birds? We had a short period in which we had permission of the EU, and it was a few years after 2003. It cost a lot of effort because you have to register from flocks and even backyard poultry. You have to ring birds, test them, follow up them, but as exporting country we have to, and we really depend on the meaning of Brussels. Finally, I would like to ask your attention for the poster presented by the Faculty of Utrecht and the Central Veterinary Institute, with thanks to Francisca Velkers, Armin Elbes, Ruud Boustra, who also gives the presentation tomorrow, and Professor Stegeman. And I want to thank you for your attention.